So what I'm here to talk about today, and I will share my screen so you all can see, is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, supported decision making. And so, like I said, if we were in person, I'd probably do a poll right about now to ask how many people have heard of supported decision making and have heard of guardianship. I'm going to assume folks don't know as much about supported decision making, provide a little context. This is just my universal disclaimer that I have to do because I'm an attorney and we have to tell you that I am not offering any legal advice. So what are we going to talk about today? I'm going to give you an overview of what supported decision making is, kind of lay the foundation by providing an example. It's actually through a video, talking through some definitions of key terms. I'm going to talk a little bit about how it works in practice, why it's important. What are some other alternatives to guardianship? So there's often a bunch of questions that pop up around guardianship or alternatives to guardianship. I will be discussing those at the end of the presentation. And I'll talk about some practice tips and give you some resources. And I'm happy to take questions throughout. I just will say probably sometimes it's easy to get off track. So I will try to kind of move along. If something's going to be addressed later in the presentation, I may ask to revisit that. And throughout the presentation, you will have to bear with me with technology as we travel down this road together into whole new, what's our new normal now. So thank you all for joining it today. So laying the foundation, what is supported decision making? And I think that the best way to really understand what supported decision making is to hear from people who actually use it. So supported decision making as a concept is recognized as a best practice and alternative to guardianship that can help preserve a person's civil rights and promote self-determination. And in this video, we're going to see a mother and daughter talk about how they use supported decision making. The daughter has intellectual disability and her mom is her supporter. And the story comes from Texas, and Texas actually was the first state in the US in 2015 to pass a supported decision-making law. So a law that recognizes supported decision-making. Just a quick note, when you're watching the video, you'll hear reference of Dawn and Belinda talking about how in Texas, somebody can lose the right to vote when they're placed under guardianship. That is the case here in Maryland as well. So just a note to that. It is a right that can be taken away from someone. Okay, so I am going to share this with you. To do that, I have to stop sharing and reshare. Okay. Hopefully everybody can hear.
Dawn was determined that she wanted to be independent. And guardianship would have meant that she would not have that opportunity. I knew that that was not going to work for her. I want her to be able to live her life. That's why supported decision-making is really important.
Disability Rights Texas presents Supported Decision-Making for Adults with Disabilities.
My name is Dawn Carlton. I'm 39 years old. I live in Austin, Texas. I'm very independent and I enjoy having the freedom to be independent.
Supported decision-making is a way of helping a person with a disability make their own choices. The person can select someone in their life that they know and trust to help them make decisions.
Hi, my name is Belinda Carlton. I live in Dale, Texas with my husband and a huge dog named Henry. I've been helping Dawn make decisions for a long time. Dawn is 39 now and has been living on her own for several years.
I asked my mom for help on medical decisions, going to the doctor if I needed to go with me. She helps me read the mail or questions that I need answered.
If there's something to do, does she understand what she needs to do? If there's a deadline, that sort of thing.
In 2015, Texas became the first state to pass a law recognizing supported decision-making as an alternative to guardianship. The new law also requires that the court consider all possible alternatives to guardianship first.
Well, that's right. You have scoliosis, but it was that you had
Herniated disc.
a herniated disc. That's right. And you kept saying the pain,
Was unbearable.
so you wanted to go ahead and go see a neurosurgeon?
Mm-hmm.
Well, what did I keep telling you? That you had the right to change your mind?
Yes. I had the right to change my mind.
And you did it.
Yes.
It's her life and her decision.
Guardianship not only takes away a person's right to make everyday choices, it removes other important rights, like the right to vote, drive, and get married.
Guardianship could take away her right to vote, right to get married. And she's done all those things. So that's a good reason for why not guardianship. Those basic rights that we all want to enjoy.
Well, independence is important because if you are out on your own, you could, just basically be free.
Just because she has a disability, just because has a label of intellectual disability doesn't mean that she cannot make her own decisions.
If you are interested in finding out more about alternatives to guardianship, including how to create a supported decision-making agreement, visit sdm.
Okay. Second. All right, so hopefully that gives you a better idea of what supported decision making is. And generally how it works. And just to kind of an example to think through. But to kind of understand what it is and why it's important and how it works, we need to have a common understanding of some basic terms. And something that Dawn and Belinda kind of hint on, but don't talk about directly, is the concept of capacity. So capacity refers to a person's ability to understand and communicate a responsible decision or any decision. Effectively, it's a person's decision-making ability. Often the ability to indicate a will or a preference and to act on it. And it exists on a spectrum that can vary depending on the person and the context, as well as the nature of the decision. And throughout all of our lives, whether or not we have a disability, our capacity to make certain decisions varies, right? Sometimes we need more support or need less support to make those decisions. So as an example, in my own life, I always say, there are certain decisions that are much easier for me to make decisions that I don't need as much support on. So if you ask me, for example, what I want for dinner, I usually have a clear idea. Or what activity I'd prefer to be doing on the weekend. Would I rather work or go for a hike? I can tell you I'd rather go for a hike. Right, there are decisions that are pretty easy for me to make. But then on the other side of the spectrum, there are decisions that are harder. So you think, I think about investing money. Not my thing, something that actually I go to my brother for because he's much better with finances than I am. I have all the student loans, he does the money portion. Right, so in our lives, we all kind of operate on this continuum of needing more and less support to make decisions. And sometimes, we're kind of in the middle. And that's the important thing to remember about capacity, is that it varies depending on an individual's, the decision at play, the individual's preference, and just, the kind of support that they may need. When we talk about legal capacity, though, it's related to capacity generally, but not quite the same. So legal capacity is a legal principle that determines what decisions a person can make under law. So, for example, whether somebody can provide consent to a medical treatment, or make a contract, sign a lease, that kind of thing. If a person has legal capacity, then their decisions are recognized under law, right? So you're presumed to have capacity. It's a presumption in Maryland law. If you do, you can sign a lease, you can give consent. For medical treatments, you can give consent for someone to view your medical records. You can do all of that. But if somebody finds that you lack capacity, then you might not be able to make these decisions. And it's important to remember that a person may lack capacity to make certain decisions, but not others. So thinking about, in my example, I may lack capacity to make certain financial decisions, but not personal decisions about my life. And that's something that's important to remember when you think about legal capacity. So if a person lacks that legal capacity, they are vulnerable to guardianship. And in Maryland, there's two forms of guardianship. There's guardianship of the person that deals with your personal needs, your medical needs. And there's guardianship of the property that deals with your finances, your assets. If a person is under guardianship, then they lose the legal authority to make certain decisions by themselves. And another person is appointed to make decisions for them, and that's called substitute decision making. And in that process, the guardian acts for the person. And it is a court process. So to become a guardian, you need to go to court, and a person needs to be found incompetent by the court. And the court is the ultimate guardian. So even if, say, you go to court and somebody, your son or daughter, your grandchild is deemed incompetent, you may be recognized as a guardian, but ultimately the court is the guardian. The court has the final oversight. And guardianship is an adversarial process. Some people ask why. It's often meant to be benevolent. But the reason why it's adversarial is because it results in people with disabilities losing their fundamental rights to do things like vote, like Dawn and Belinda talked about, marry, decide where you live, decide how your day's structured, decide how your finances are handled, right? Those are very important rights if you think about it, things that define our lives and how they're lived. And so to take that away from somebody, you're going to have to, it's going to be an adversarial process. The person with a disability is going to be represented by another attorney. The court's going to hear evidence from both sides. It's going to be a full trial. And that's the reason why, is because of the liberty interests and the civil rights at stake. I always kind of take a pause here to comment on the standards that are in place for somebody to be put under guardianship. So what I find is very interesting, right, about most guardianship statutes across the country and guardianship laws is that you have to have a disability to be put under guardianship. And if you look at this definition for guardian of the person, it says a person may lack sufficient understanding or capacity to communicate responsible decisions, so make good, responsible choices concerning his or her person. And that must be due to a disability. So think through that for a second, right? Because I'm, as a person without a disability, allowed to make irresponsible decisions every day. And no one can threaten to put me under guardianship because I don't have a disability. But for people with disabilities, that threat is real. And they can make the same decisions as somebody else, but be vulnerable to guardianship, whereas the person without a disability is not. So I think that that's important to kind of structure the conversation and thinking about guardianship, because it's a tool in the toolbox. It's something that may be appropriate in certain situations, but it inherently is biased, right, against people with disabilities at its core. Under Maryland law, to pursue guardianship, you also have to make sure that there's no less restrictive alternatives available. And that may mean, for example, if there's, as we'll talk about later, any of the other alternatives to guardianship, if there's a power of attorney, if there's an advanced medical directive, if there's a surrogate decision maker, if there's supported decision making, I would argue, guardianship isn't appropriate, right? If any of those other options are appropriate, then you shouldn't go ahead and move forward with the guardianship. And guardian of the property has a similar standard. You have to have to be unable to manage your property effectively, and you must be entitled to property or benefits that need proper management. And that needs to be due to a disability as well. The only thing that I would note there is that some people, often I see courts place someone under plenary guardianship, which means guardianship of the person and property. And sometimes all that's at play as far as property is something like Social Security benefits. Social Security benefits, as we'll see later, are dealt with typically through a representative payee. So the guardian of the property actually has no say over what happens to somebody's Social Security benefits. So it doesn't make sense oftentimes to get a guardian of the property, guardianship of the property, if your only asset is Social Security. But what is supported decision-making, right? The thing that you're here to learn about today. And it's an alternative to guardianship that allows a person to keep their decision-making authority without appointing a substitute decision maker. So without appointing a guardian, without appointing an agent under a power of attorney, it lets that person keep their ability to make their own decisions. And how does that work? Well, people use trusted friends and family members to help them understand the situation and the circumstances that they face and to make their own decisions. And by doing that, it's a means to increase self-determination and empower people, which we will see as later in the presentation is a critical point in kind of increasing people's life outcomes and supporting folks. So to kind of summarize across the scale, you have kind of a realm of decision-making from independent decision-making to substitute decision-making and guardianship, and supported decision-making can kind of expand across that. So how does it work in practice, right? These are all nice ideas. How does it actually work? So under supported decision-making models, a person can select another person or a team of people to help them think through, decide, communicate, and effectuate their decisions. And what's critical here is that oftentimes those can be different people, right? I say, my brother's really good with finances, right? So maybe I have him as a supporter for my financial issues. But my mom's a nurse and my partner knows me best. And so maybe I have them as supporters for the medical, right? So supported decision-making allows the flexibility of allowing you to bring people who you want in to make whatever decisions are most important to you. So it's really individualized in that sense. Supporters' jobs are to ask questions, to listen, to provide advice if it's warranted. Sometimes people don't want advice, they just want somebody to help them ask questions, to translate. And I pause here because this is something that's really important. People with disabilities, people with TBI, may communicate in different ways, right? You may communicate in gestures, you may communicate in with eye contact, you may communicate with behavior. And it may not be possible for third parties, say for lawyers or other professionals, to understand what the behavior or the gestures or the eye contact means, right? And as somebody's supporter, it's your job to translate that to them and to say, okay, well, this is what, when this person gets excited, this is what they do, or when this person has anxiety, this is the reaction that they have. So we need to take a minute before continuing. That's the job of a supporter. And ultimately, the person's most important job as supporter is to respect the individual's decision. Because throughout this entire process, that person with a disability at the center of this keeps their right to make their own decision. They are the decision maker. And nationally and internationally, this supported decision-making is recognized as the best practice that can preserve the civil rights of people with disabilities and eliminate the need for substitute decision-making in many situations. So now we're going to see a little bit of how it works in the healthcare context by watching this video that actually is from
Title screen, supported decision-making in healthcare and medical.
It's from the National Disability Rights Network, and with which they were able to produce with a grant from the WITH Foundation. It's based in California.
Medical treatment decisions. What is supported decision-making? Michael Kendrick.
Supported decision-making is a way to support people so that they can make decisions by picking supporters that they trust on particular topics.
Richard Laballo.
Supported decision-making is an alternative to guardianship, where a person with a disability can get assistance from a relative, a friend, or anyone to assist them in making decisions. And that ultimately the person with a disability makes the decision, but the supporter is someone like an advisor that helps them answer questions or provide information, but they are not the one making the decision.
Dawn and Belinda Carlton.
Well, you give a person the opportunity to make a decision.
Title screen. What is the role of the supporter? Beatrice Degree.
It's okay to have someone to support you in your decisions, to get a little help from somebody. It could be your aunt or your mom or dad or anybody.
Michael.
Not imposing a decision on a person, but giving them as much space as possible to be the person that ultimately makes that decision in an informed way.
Thelma Green.
The supporter should remember that is the person they're working for that make the decision, not them.
Title screen. How does supported decision-making work at the doctor's office? Dr. Cynthia Peacock.
What I tell the patients is you're making the decisions, but you're just identifying somebody that's going to help you in case you have questions about what you're making the decision about. Sometimes if we're asking Beatrice, it may be complicated. And so I think Beatrice would turn to her aunt to, get some confirmation about it or get some support about how she wants to do her care. It might be a complicated procedure we might be doing, or maybe a medication we want to give her, and she'll need to talk to her aunt about that.
Beatrice.
It doesn't matter what you said. If my aunt says I can make a decision, if like people told me I have to make a decision, I'm going to make the decision.
Dr. Peacock.
We really try to facilitate, where the patient is at time and how well that they understand what we're trying to ask that they participate in. So we're participating in care plans, healthcare plans. Asking them to participate in their healthcare is giving them quality of care that otherwise they may not have had in the past.
Richard.
One of the problems as an advocate who's represented people with intellectual disabilities is that often medical professionals and mental health professionals don't listen to people with disabilities. And they're basically just telling them what they need to do.
Dr. Peacock.
We had one young man who was given a diagnosis of cancer. He got to make the decisions when and where and how he was going to participate, and when he was going to get his treatments, and what his life was going to be. And like, I'm going to do basketball before I go get my chemotherapy.
Thelma.
I suggest that doctors and nurses should talk to the individuals, the patient, the one that's coming for the help, instead talking to their supporters.
Dr. Peacock.
An individual with an intellectual disability sometimes can struggle in a doctor's appointment, maybe fearful of what's happening around them. Maybe they weren't given enough time to understand and to participate in the discussion and in the visit. So maybe an individual provider out there has maybe an implicit bias about that individual, thinking that they can't make a decision, and then and makes that decision maybe in a couple of minutes of the visit, and then turns to the family member or the provider that's with them.
Thelma.
The doctors and stuff need to take a step back and talk and take time to listen to the people, because everybody can't talk verbal like me or can't talk as fast.
Dr. Peacock.
If someone has to sit and think about a decision and they have to confer with their family member or who they've anointed as their supported decision maker, you just may have to leave the room and let them spend time talking about it, go on and see another patient, and then come back.
Thelma.
Maybe they might have speech problem because of their cerebral palsy, or they might had a stroke or whatever that slowed them down. Everything is so fast nowadays, like a computer. They need to take a step back, like typewriter age, and really listen to those who really trying to get their point across and get their voice heard in a lot of other ways.
Dr. Peacock.
Or it may be something you take home when you come back the next day or the next week. There's nothing to say that you can't see that patient again and again, 2, 3, 4 times before that decision is made. I think that that's something that providers don't really think about when it comes to, oh yeah, I could just have them come back and we can talk about it some more. They want that decision there and now, and then we can get on with whatever's going to happen.
Michael.
There's still hard things in decision making. That supported decision making, it makes a lot of it easier, but still intrinsically, some decision making is intrinsically going to be not straightforward and stressing of the person, and difficult to be sure you made the right decision.
Thelma.
Sometimes doctors look at our equipment before they look at us as a human being and a person.
Dawn and Belinda.
We have to give them the opportunity to be a part of the world and take chances and make mistakes and
Fall and get back up.
Beatrice.
When I get older, I have to be making decisions for my kids.
Special thanks to Dawn Carlton from Austin, Texas.
Okay. So, oh man, I always do this. Let's see. So hopefully that gave you a bit more context for how supported decision making works in practice. And I love Thelma Green's comment of slowing things down, like going back to typewriter age, stopping with the computer age and going back to typewriter age, because I think that that's something that's really important that we don't always think about it. And I know as an attorney, right, everything is about how quickly you can do something, how quickly you can move things along. And so often people with disabilities just need a little bit more time. And I think that that's something that's important to remember when you talk about supported decision making and you talk about being somebody's supporter. So why is supported decision making important? Well, it's important because most other states have done something about it. So over a third of states have introduced legislation on supported decision making. Texas was the first. Delaware was the second. And actually, we should be on this list. Maryland has a very, very narrow law that recognizes supported decision making in the context of organ transplants. So there was some concern that healthcare providers basically weren't thinking that people with disabilities should be eligible for receiving organ transplants because they couldn't understand the treatment that was needed to sustain the transplant. And there was a law that was passed in Maryland in 2015 that recognized that supported decision making can help the person understand that that treatment. It's specific to organ transplants, so it's not extended to anything else. I believe it's only applies to people with intellectual developmental disabilities, but it does exist there in law. So why is it important? It's also important because a number of organizations have endorsed it. So the American Bar Association, for lawyers, the National Guardianship Association actually has come out in support of it. The National Council on Disability, the American Civil Liberties Union, the Arc of the United States, the Uniform Law Commission, amongst others. So it's been pretty widely endorsed. It's also important because there's no legal tool that lets us do something similar. So there's no legal tool out there right now that we have that lets somebody select a person to support them in making, communicating, and effectuating their own decisions while letting them keep their legal capacity. All of our other legal tools tend to be all or nothing. So guardianship appoints somebody to make decisions for you if you're not able to. A power of attorney does the same. Powers of attorney often, they're either springing, so they happen at a certain event, or they can happen immediately upon signing it. But they allow somebody else to be your agent to make decisions for you. Surrogate decision making, which I'll talk about later as well, is another form of substitute decision making, where you lose the ability to make your own medical decisions, but someone else can make them for you. Supported decision making is also a natural transition from person-centered planning reforms that have happened across the country and at the federal level. Right, when we think about real person-centered planning and really, providing individual care and meeting with people's teams to talk about what's best, supported decision-making naturally springs from that, right? It's all about putting the person at the center, putting them behind the wheel, and supporting them in, getting whatever supports or services that they need to achieve their goals and their dreams. And so it naturally flows out of person-centered planning. Why is it important again? So another reason why it's important is people with TBI, people with disabilities, are really vulnerable to guardianship. Now I'll go back to the statute that I shared in the beginning, right, where I said, basically here's the standard to be put under guardianship. So if you're talking about a person with TBI, say, and they're an older adult, they acquired TBI, let's say in their early 30s, and in their 20s, they could have been making irresponsible decisions, but it wouldn't have been subject, right, to that guardianship statute. But they can make the same decisions in their 30s after they've acquired a TBI and be subject to guardianship. And so that's the irony, is that, you can be making the same decisions, yet be vulnerable to guardianship. And I've seen so often how easy it is to place a person under guardianship because of the stereotypes and assumptions about people with disabilities. I have seen it happen on a regular basis, based solely on a diagnosis. So with little evaluation of what a person's actual decision-making capability is, just merely on the fact that they, can't, they have a certain disability. That's all you need. That qualifies them, and that's not really the case, and that's not what our law says. But in practice, I've seen it happen quite a bit. Supported decision-making creates a means for supporters to support that person in making decisions instead of making it for them. And it helps people, especially people with TBI, refine their decision-making skills and their self-advocacy skills across time. I always say I didn't make the best decisions when I was 18, right? But that was when I was legally considered to be an adult. I learned across time how to make better decisions. And that was dignity of risk that was given to me, the opportunity to take risks and to make mistakes and to learn, right? How to make better decisions. We should afford people with disabilities, right, that same opportunity. Supported decision-making is also important because people have different ways of communicating. And it doesn't mean that they can't express their preferences or choices or wishes. It just means that they might communicate in behavior. They might communicate in gestures, like I mentioned. And that's not something that's so strange, right? You have people close to you who probably can tell if you're upset by a situation before you say a word. If it's your body language of how you tense up, if it's any physical reaction that you have. Behavior is a form of communication, and that's universal across the board. And we should be recognizing that. To the extent that people can communicate those preferences, we should respect them. And that's really what the last bullet point goes to, is to whatever extent that we can respect those preferences and choices, we should. And the reason why is because that is critical to a person's identity. Think for just a minute about all the choices that you've made across your life that brought you here, right? Think about decisions. They're basically the decisions that define you, from what career you chose, right, to where you live, to who you partner with, to who you vote for, to where you work. Those are all critical decisions that not only, define the course of your life, but define how you see yourself. And when we take those decisions away from people with disabilities, we're taking away that psychological evolution as well, right? That ability to craft your own vision of yourself, to try out new things. Now, you can have guardianship and have a very supportive guardian that allows you to do all these things. But at its core, right, guardianship starts from a different principle. Guardian starts from the legal idea that somebody can't make decisions and that another person is responsible for them. Supported decision-making starts at a different point. It says the person can make their own decisions, and we should recognize that. Studies also show that people who are denied self-determination experience worse life outcomes. So overbroad guardianships have significant negative impact on a person's physical and mental health, longevity, ability to function, and reports of low subjective well-being. People subject to undue guardianship experience low self-esteem, passivity, and feelings of inadequacy and incompetency. Right, and that kind of springs from the fact that if you take away somebody's choices and their ability to kind of engage and make their own decisions, they often are excluded from the conversation, and that leads to this it can lead to this spiraling. So on the flip side, studies have shown that people who exercise greater self-determination have improved life outcomes. So they're more likely to live independently. They're more likely to work in the community at higher paying jobs. I always pause here. This next one's where it says more likely to identify situations where they could be abused and less likely to suffer abuse. And that makes sense, right? Because if you teach someone, right, if I as a practitioner in the field always make sure that when I'm approaching a case or approaching a person with a disability, I'm talking directly to them and making sure that they know that their perspective and their point of view matters, then they're gonna start internalizing that, right? They're going, if somebody tries to exploit them or take advantage of them, right? You're promoting these tools of self-advocacy by engaging somebody. And that's really what can keep people safe. As studies have shown as well, right, that people who exercise greater self-determination have greater financial independence and greater community integration. So what are some other alternatives to guardianship? I think it's easiest in a way to kind of break these up based on whether somebody is found to have legal capacity for certain things or isn't. So if someone's found to have legal capacity, they can sign a power of attorney that, like I kind of mentioned earlier, is a document that lets somebody else make decisions for them in certain areas. You can have a medical power of attorney. You can have a financial power of attorney. What's critical to think about in powers of attorney is that, you know, there's a lot of legalese that goes into them. If a person only understands certain aspects of it, tailor the power of attorney to what they understand. That's what any good attorney should do, right? Is really focus on what the person can understand and only include that in the document. Consent to exchange information. So your HIPAA forms, your FERPA forms, which are for special education. Somebody has the capacity to sign a consent to release information, which is as simple as saying, I want mom to have access to my medical records. They can sign it. That can be a tool and an alternative. Person-centered planning, of course, is a great alternative, and so is supported decision-making. As far as the financial realm, you get into special needs trusts, ABLE accounts, which are a great asset for people with disabilities to kind of acquire, save up some money without having to be subject to the asset limit for Medicaid and for Social Security. In the medical realm, you have advanced medical directives and advanced directive for mental health treatment, which is for mental health. If a person lacks capacity, right, if they don't have that legal capacity, you still can use person-centered planning. You still can use supported decision-making. You also might consider very limited guardianship. And I put this here because it can be task specific. So often and too often I see, you know, maybe that a guardianship's needed just for a very narrow issue, but a person comes out with a guardianship of the person and the guardianship of the property. And maybe all that was needed is they needed some help setting up a special needs trust. It doesn't have to be, guardianship doesn't have to be something that's so broad. For finances, if the person's only finance is a Social Security benefit, then look no further than the representative payee that allows somebody to manage someone's Social Security benefits. And in Maryland, we also have a surrogate decision-making law. That law creates a hierarchy. If someone's unable to make a medical decision and certified by 2 physicians, they're not able to do that, then there is a list of people who can make decisions for you. Starts out with your spouse, your partner, follows with your adult children. Next on the list is any, I think it's parents and then siblings. And then we work down all the way to friend. So that's actually, there's nothing, you don't have to go to court. Your surrogate decision maker has the ability to make medical decisions for you with the exception of sterilization and any mental health treatment. Great. So what are some practice tips when we're thinking about supported decision making? So just remember that people communicate and express preferences in different ways. And that doesn't mean that they can't, right, communicate. It just may mean that they use different forms and they need somebody to help translate what their behavior or what their communication means to somebody who only communicates verbally. Everyone uses supported decision-making, regardless of whether or not you have a disability. So supported decision-making is recognized as an alternative to guardianship for people with disabilities, but it's also something that we all use. None of us make a decision in a vacuum, right? We're always asking somebody who we care about what their advice is or what their input is on something. And maybe we take that advice or maybe we don't, right? But that's supported decision-making. That's what it's about. Supported decision-making is about asking, listening, providing that advice and support when it's requested, and respecting a person's decision, right? It's saying you have the ability to make your own decision and I'm gonna let you do it, but I'm just here if you have any questions, kind of like your guardrails. Sometimes people make bad decisions. It doesn't mean that they lack capacity. Just remember this, and that concept of dignity of risk. It's so important. It's not, it just allowing people to have the opportunity to take some risks in their life and to learn from their mistakes is critical. What can I do now? Promote self-determination. So ask questions and listen and recognize the place for dignity of risk. Help someone create an expression of my wishes. And when I say, I'm just gonna read a short paragraph from this document. I did work in British Columbia, Canada before coming to actually the Arc of Northern Virginia and then DRM. British Columbia was actually the first jurisdiction in the world to pass a law on supported decision-making. And when I was there was a document created for a young woman who needed some support. And she was nonverbal, and her caregivers helped document how she communicated decisions. And this is so important, especially for people who are nonverbal or communicate in different ways, for someone to help document how they do communicate. So that, if there's a changeover in caregivers, if you leave the person's life, there's a record out there somewhere about how that person communicates. I'll read just a quick part of it because I know we're kind of short on time. I may communicate using gestures, gazing, and sometimes reaching. I was learning cause and effect on a computer touch screen. I was learning that if I reached out to touch the computer screen, I could make the picture on the screen change. I'm not always able to make my hand do what I want because I have a lot of seizures which interfere with my thoughts and abilities. However, I was able to prove to my teacher when not having seizures that I can learn cause and effect. I expressed pleasure with smiles, eye contact, and most often by bouncing my right leg up and down. I expressed displeasure with facial frowns, pushing people away with my arms. I like swimming, exercise time, free time, sitting independently on the floor, horseback riding, and group functions. I show I like these things by bouncing my right foot, remaining alert, occasional smiles, vocalizing, making eye contact, and trying to participate to the best of my abilities. I show my dislike by refusing to make eye contact, frowning, clenching my teeth, and pushing my caregiver with my arms. I will cover my eyes and roll my head into my arm to indicate I wish to put my sunglasses on. If I do this in the house and it isn't sunny out, it means I want to go out. I spend my leisure time at home watching TV or being with family gathered around the kitchen table. I also really enjoy my special lazy boy chair. I really like to listen to country music and watch country music videos on TV. I'm content and happy as long as I'm included in all family functions and discussions. I can be very vocal if I think I'm being ignored. So those are just some examples to kind of get you thinking, right, of how you can document somebody's wishes and preferences if they communicate in different ways. If someone presumes, so another practice tip, if someone presumes that the person that you're supporting is unable to make a decision, put your hat on as a supporter. I know it's common because everybody's kind of in a hurry these days. And so you may go to see a medical provider, you may even go see any other kind of professional. And if you're there with a person with a disability, they're going to look at you, not the person with a disability, and start asking you questions instead of them. You should redirect them, right? And remind them that they don't mean to be talking to you, they mean to be talking to the person next to you. And be clear about how they communicate. And just generally educate others about supported decision-making. I have some resources here, and I will take some questions now. I wasn't monitoring the chat, and I'm sure that some questions came up, so I would be happy to look at them.
Yep, so there was one question that says, even if effective upon my signature, My understanding is that individuals can or should still make their own decisions with a power of attorney in place until they can't. So it sounds like that supported decision makers are less restrictive regardless because they can't make decisions for the individual, whereas power of attorneys can. And they were asking if they understood that correctly.
Yes, so that's exactly right. And that's the nuance with powers of attorney is that, right, the person who's signing it until they've been deemed incompetent can make their own decisions. I've sometimes seen though in practice, if I have somebody come in and they are, whoever it is comes in and says, I'm power of attorney, and they show me the power of attorney, and that's the case. And it's something, and I'm realizing that we're going down a path where we're starting to talk about something really critical about, the next step in their legal case. And that person with power of attorney is kind of saying, no, you don't need to listen, you don't need to talk to the person. You only have to talk to me. I'm always going to ask to bring that person, the person with a disability, whoever actually signed the power of attorney, back in. Because you always want to make sure, you as a kind of professionals will always run up against the issue of, you always want to make sure that until the person's been deemed incapable, that, they're aware of what's going on. So that is correct. People can still make their own decisions until they're deemed incapable, and supported decision making is less restrictive because it keeps the authority with the person. So you have that exactly right.
Great. So I'm going to unmute everyone. So then that way, if you have any questions, you can voice them for Megan right now. You're still going to need to unmute yourself individually. And if there's anything else, please let us know.
Hi, so it doesn't sound like there's an actual document or anything that, for instance, the doctor's office would have on file, where the individual indicated who they appoint or anoint as their supported decision maker.
Yeah, so great question. So you're right. We don't have a law here in Maryland yet that recognizes supported decision making. We're kind of working on that right now. But there's nothing to say that many other states who don't have laws recognize this under the Americans with Disabilities Act just as a reasonable accommodation. If you need a support person to help make decisions, you can write down who you want present, and that can be important when you're using any waiver services, right? If it's clear how the team should be operating and who should be included in decision making, or even outside if you're at the doctor's office, just being clear about what everybody's role is. But right now there isn't a law, which means that there isn't we don't have a precise form, but most states have made the argument, that don't have laws, that this fits under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So you can kind of, you still use it as a reasonable accommodation request, basically, if that answers the question.
Thank you.
So Megan, when it comes to this then, do I understand correctly that really supported and surrogate are not interchangeable words when it comes to this?
Yes, and that is, there's actually there's a National Resource Center on Supported Decision Making, and their website is here, and their legal director has it's kind of a shtick about there are too many SDMs, and so there's surrogate decision making, there's substitute decision making, and there's supported decision making. And supported decision making is very different than surrogate decision making. And it just starts from that point of, under surrogate decision making, somebody's been found incompetent, whereas under supported decision making, somebody isn't. Now I will say, we have that difference, so that's clear. But in practice, guardianship is a tool in the toolbox, and I've seen some fantastic guardians use supported decision-making within guardianship. So try to, cultivate this ability if folks to make more decisions across time, to learn how to make better decisions, even though they're under guardianship. So there is a clear difference because it starts from a kind of a different point of whether somebody is competent or incompetent, but it doesn't mean that the principles can't be used, even if somebody is under guardianship, if that makes sense.
Okay, any other questions for Megan?
I have one. Megan, can you talk a little bit about how you could use supported decision-making for people that are newly injured if they've had a brain injury and things are changing pretty rapidly with what they may be understanding and families trying to navigate medical choices? Can you talk a little bit about how that might apply for those situations with people who have very recently sustained a brain injury?
Right. And are you saying, things are changing rapidly for insofar as people are improving across time, or kind of there's an immediate, loss of skill when you're trying to navigate this new terrain?
So a little bit of both. I think it varies a lot for different situations, but for some people that they have had the injury, they may be in a coma for a while and are coming out of it and are able to understand more information over time. And they're also probably getting a lot of medical services during this period as well.
So I think, in an immediate context, if somebody is in a coma, supported decision-making may look, a lot different. You're gonna, you may be clearly more squarely in substitute decision-making there, drawing upon what you knew the person wanted before the brain injury. But as I'm always a proponent of the fact that you check in with people, right? Even there's been a number of studies, folks who, you presume that they don't know anything, other that they are in a coma, and then, God forbid, we learn that they actually can feel and can, are experiencing everything and just can't physically speak. And so you always want to be including that person and monitoring that person's behavior. And I think what's critical is really giving the person the opportunity to be involved in decision-making across time, because what we've seen happen, as we start to pull, just in 2010, closing the Rosewood Center, one of our institutions for people with developmental disabilities here in Maryland. People, if people aren't stimulated, if people aren't encouraged to make decisions, they'll lose that ability. And so as somebody is recovering, keep them involved, right? Keep presenting those decisions to them, even if you're not sure what they understand or they don't. Watch the behavior, just listen. Michael Kendrick, I think in one of the videos, said, there's a lot of this about decision-making that's hard. And I think that one of the things that's particularly hard is that none of us, some of us, right, make snap decisions, but a lot of times it's just about taking more time. Really getting to know somebody, knowing how they communicate, listening across time. It is a time-intensive process. And that's something, especially if you're on the road to recovery, that's, you're going to be wanting to calibrate, right, your expectations across time. Just because somebody, right, can't make a decision about finances today doesn't mean that they can't make this decision, a decision a couple weeks down the line or a couple months down the line. And so it's really important to always be checking in. So I think that it's really, in those situations, it's about really thinking about how things change across time and giving that person the time and the opportunity to participate in the decision making.
Thank you.
And I should say as well, if folks have any questions, I think about after the fact, you can feel free to email me or give me a call at any time.
I was gonna say we're gonna be sending out the PowerPoint presentation and the recording of this session with Megan's contact information, along with some resources as well as the evaluation. So if you do have any questions, you will have that information going out no later than tomorrow. All right, well, if there's no other questions, thank you so much, Megan, for leading us through this topic, and greatly appreciate everybody who joined us today. And again, I'm so sorry about the link not going out, but I appreciate everybody's patience with trying to get in, and thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for the presentation. It was good.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you so much, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Everybody.